welcome back to my channel. Today we're in New York City.
Hey adventurers, welcome to Let's Just Go podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Kayla, and today we are going to New York City. Very exciting.
Oh shit. The city that doesn't sleep.
I thought that was Vegas.
You're right. The Big
Okay. I
Apple.
was like, wait, I think New York City also doesn't sleep.
It definitely doesn't. I was just booking my flights to Vegas for next month, so it's on my brain.
It's funny because I'm actually wearing a shirt that says Las Vegas right now.
Yeah, your time as a showgirl.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, all right. So the Big Apple.
Yeah.
We'll start there.
Yeah. So I've been there. You live, what, 2 hours away, right?
2-hour car ride. Yep.
Yeah. So you're super close, where I've only been there twice. I went in August 2023 and I went in August 2022. So my experience in New York City is very specific to the month of August. And both times I actually went for concerts. So last year was for Jonas Brothers concert at Yankee Stadium, which was so cool. And the year before that was actually with Rebecca, who has been a guest on our podcast. And she used to live in New York City. And I went with her to see Harry Styles at Madison Square Garden because Rebecca is a huge Harry Styles fan. So it's a lot of fun.
Nice. And you flew into where?
JFK every time I've flown in. Yeah. It's the easiest airport to get to from San Antonio.
Okay.
Not the easiest airport to get into the city from, but easiest to get a flight into. Yeah.
No, and that's what I was thinking. I've actually last year went to a Yankees game, and so in Philly you can take the train up, right? And that's part of you can get into 30th Street Station in Philly. It's an hour and 20 minute train ride to MSG, right, to Penn Station, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's right under Madison Square Garden, and so you are, right smack in the middle of Manhattan. But to get from Manhattan to the Yankee Stadium, I'm well traveled, but the subway system in New York City, I have some friends who live there. They always say we always stay above ground. So, Ubering or Lyfting or taking a taxi to the Yankee, it took like 45 minutes to get there, and it's not 45 minutes away.
It's
right?
not a quick subway ride though either, because we were staying in Brooklyn. We were staying in Carroll Gardens specifically, which is a wonderful, cute neighborhood if you've never been. And we had to take, I think it was 2 different trains. Like we took a train to get to where we needed to transfer to get on the train to go to Yankee Stadium. And the trains that go through Manhattan are so drastically different than the train that goes to the Bronx. Who would have thought, right? It was really slow. It was very rickety. It was not as smooth of a ride. The advertisements were all about not taking fentanyl and overdosing, basically. It was just really interesting. But it was an easy ride there. We intentionally waited out the ride back at the end of the night because I don't want to actually be stuck in the terminal with 1,000 other millennial women and or Gen Z women, because really it's mostly Gen Z. They're not millennials. So my mom and I got a hot dog and waited it out, which was fine.
Nice. But you bring up a good point. So lots of people currently doing this new buzzword called gig traveling, right? Where they're just going to, they're traveling to different destinations, whether it's following, we have talked about briefly Dave Matthews Band to South Africa, or you're following your favorite people to New York City, and you don't live, you don't even live on the East Coast. So it's something people are doing. They're spending the money and they're making it an experience. And I think Taylor Swift, right? Obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Because people picked to travel out of
I traveled.
necessity to get to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you're
The
unwell. You're
close.
unwell.
I spent 2023, I think most of my travel last year was for concerts. So I went to Seattle for Taylor Swift, and it was supposed to also be Paramore the next night, but then Haley Williams got sick, so I didn't get to see Paramore. I traveled to New York City for Jonas Brothers. I traveled to Seattle for the Jonas Brothers. I also traveled to Vegas for Life is Beautiful, which is a music festival. Like I did a lot of traveling. And this year I'm going to Hollywood in June to see Noah Khan at the Hollywood Bowl, which is like a dream destination for me in terms of concert venues. Um, yeah, I think it's like there's been this conversation about how like millennials aren't as religious as like previous generations, and how a lot of millennials sort of associate music and like the concert experience with like the religious experience, which I think is really interesting. Um, Chris is a
Did you
religious
mean
person.
cult?
How do you feel about that?
First of all, not that religious, and that's why I said, did you mean cult?
Yeah, yeah,
No, I love me some Jesus, but yeah, raised Catholic. I don't,
yeah,
it's not really
yeah,
panning out. But the no, I think that's fair. I mean, you're looking, right? People look for connection, right? And that's something
yeah,
that religion gives them, right? A
yeah.
shared interest across that transcends, race,
Hmm.
gender, ethnicity, all that, right? So
Yeah,
socioeconomic class and so forth. So music does that, unless maybe not socioeconomic class in terms of concert, because that shit ain't cheap.
yeah. It's getting more and more expensive. And like, so I went to 4 Jonas Brothers concerts last year. By the way, 4 is too many. Like you and I were talking earlier about Dave Matthews Band and how I was telling Chris before we started recording that Dave Matthews Band started this trend of like people following. At least that's the earliest that I can remember. It was probably actually like Grateful Dead or something, but seeing the same artist in concert once a month for 4 months, it was too many. I was kind of bored. Like I was like, okay, I know what's gonna happen next. Okay, I know the like shtick that they're gonna do because they do it every concert. And like that's it kind of takes the fun out of it. But anyways, we
Yeah,
this is not an episode about concerts, but
I, it's not, nor first world problems, because that's what
no.
that just sounded like.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Lesson
but
learned.
yeah, so New York City, though, you get there. I mean, one thing you also mentioned that I have to. So my former job, I was in educational technology sales, and I covered the state of New York. So I was in New York City often in schools and really like diving into the awesomeness that is New York City, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you mentioned a small little town. There's so many small sections of the 5 boroughs, right? That right, Astoria and Queens. I mean, nice, quaint little areas that are in this huge, bustling city. But
Yeah.
um, I love New York City. I don't think I could live there. I love how I approach, right? Like, we can, as you mentioned, 2 hour car ride up to New York City. Of course, you're spending $25 and just to go under the tunnel and the
Oh, the
tolls, and
tolls.
you're
Yeah.
paying $100 to park, and right, nothing about New York City is cheap. But
Mm-mm.
so that's why sometimes taking the train is easier. But I love being able to pop in and pop right back out and just get a little taste of what it is, because it is, as we joked, it doesn't sleep.
Yeah.
There's always something happening, and honestly, if you're trying to find a lid for your pot, that is the place you go. It is. It is.
Yeah.
There is something for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And anybody there, anybody's welcome there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. So my first experience was with Rebecca and a friend of hers, and they stayed in Brooklyn because that's where Rebecca was living. And I stayed at a pod hotel in Manhattan because it was just me. And I don't know if you know about the pod hotels, Chris, but they are like cruise room size. Like they're
Yeah.
very small. I was in a twin size bed, which was fine again because it was just me. But I still paid like $1,000 for I think 4 nights. So like it was still like not an inexpensive place to stay. Um, and then when I came with my mom, we stayed in Brooklyn, and it's so fascinating to me how drastically different the boroughs are, right? So at this point, I've experienced Brooklyn, I've experienced Manhattan, and I've experienced the Bronx, if you can count like hanging out outside of Yankee Stadium, the Bronx, which I don't really think you can. Maybe the subway station, it probably is the most defining, like, this is the Bronx versus anything else. Um, but it's so fascinating how drastically different these places are. And when I came the first time and I stayed in Manhattan, I was like, this is not a place I could live. I don't understand how Rebecca lives here. Like, this is such a like bustling place. And it seemed to me like there was nothing to do because of the fact that I was staying in a very touristy part of Manhattan. And then to stay in Brooklyn for my next trip was so different. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this place. I could totally live here. And my mom, bless her heart, she's like, this is where I need to live. This is where I need to be. I have to live here. Like, I could totally see myself living here. And I'm like, okay, mom, do you want to come like work in New York City? And like, as a
As a
teacher,
teacher,
I don't know that that's going to work out for you the way you want it to.
you're hired. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, right? And all the locals, right? Because when you think of New York City, most people think of Manhattan, right?
Yeah.
That's where you're going to have 42nd Street and Times Square, right? All the Broadway shows and right, all the things that are happening that Bryant Street Park
Bryant
and
Park,
Bryant Park and the old, the original Macy's for the parade, all those things, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you think of it. Locals will never find them. You'll never find locals there, right? They're like, no, we stay clear of Manhattan.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be able to go and see a show and again, Times Square. I mean, I've walked Times Square probably any hour of the day, from 2 a.m. to 2 p.m. and it looks the same.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's just that many people there at any point, at any time. And that's, where you feel like it is, not to sound cheesy, but that place that welcomes everybody. I mean, you see people from all over the world that are just there to visit. And you think to yourself, you came to America to see this.
I was definitely underwhelmed by Times Square. I think that in pictures and like movies, they are really good about like forced perspective and making it seem like this gigantic place. And then you get there and first of all, you get there and there's like thousands of people around you. And if you're like me, you hate crowds and you don't want to be there at all. You're just trying to check the box, right? Of like, went to Times Square. But it's not nearly as massive as it feels like, especially being surrounded by all of those people, because you're realizing that like you can't all fit in the space that you're in. And like,
right.
How are we all here? But it was cool to experience once. I think that I like walked my mom across Times Square. Like I was like, we're not doing this. Like on the way to a Broadway show, I was like, we will just keep walking. The light is not green, but there are no cars. Let's go.
Yeah, no, just keep moving.
Yeah.
What Broadway show did you see?
So have you heard of Broadway Roulette?
Is that where you can get like cheaper tickets?
Yeah. So I did it with Rebecca and we saw Aladdin. So it's essentially the way it works is that they give you a list of shows that you could potentially see. You're allowed to cross off 5 shows. And then if you're continually using the same account, they won't send you the same show. So I saw Aladdin with Rebecca. And then the next year, my mom and I went and it wouldn't send me to Aladdin. So I'd already seen Aladdin, even though it had been a year. So it's really fun because I don't know a ton about Broadway shows. Like I'm not like a Broadway enthusiast, but I think it's fun to go like experience. So we saw Here Lies Love, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's
Nope.
a story about the Filipino like presidency in the 50s. And it's like told via disco. Like it's a really, really interesting show. And like spoilers, I didn't know how it ended. I mean, it's like literally based on history and it ends with somebody dying that if you're like watching the story unfold naturally in front of you for the very first time, you're not expecting him to die. So I like leaned over to my mom and I was like, do you remember this happening? I don't think she did. But we loved that show so much and we had no plans for the next night. So my mom and I were like, fuck it. Let's do this again tomorrow night. And we went and saw Shucked, which was so good. I feel like at this point, everybody's heard about Shucked. But this was before I think it had really like blown up and people really knew what it was. And we went into it being like, it's a show about corn. Like, this is going to be weird. What's going to happen? And it was amazing. Absolutely phenomenal. They actually had a Tiny Desk concert a couple of months ago. If you're into NPR Tiny Desk concerts, really good though.
No. NPR. What?
Wait, do you not know about Tiny Desk concerts?
No, because I'm not 90 and listen to NPR.
No, Chris, listen, hear me out. When we're done recording this, go on YouTube, type in Tiny Desk Concert. It's a wide variety of artists performing in this very small venue at NPR's headquarters, I'm pretty sure. Or like Olivia Rodrigo did one in a DMV during the pandemic. And it's really cool because it's acoustic sets of songs. Like Taylor Swift has done one. Mac Miller did one before he passed. The Jonas Brothers have done one. Like, it's like a variety of like indie artists and also like really big names. It's really, I can't believe you've never heard of it. You're clearly not a music person like I am. It's okay.
I'm not a huge music person. Yeah, no.
It's okay.
No.
What Broadway shows have you seen?
Oh, gosh. I saw Aladdin. Mm-hmm. I saw The Lion King twice, I think, actually. I'm
sensing a theme here. Next, you're going to say Frozen, aren't you?
No, I know. My family saw Frozen. I missed that one. It was the girls' trip. But I feel like I've seen some, like, not in New York City. Yeah. Oh, Rent. I'd seen Rent before. And Wicked. I guess they're two, pretty big.
Those are pretty big.
But again, that's the thing. I mean, so, on the weekends they have the matinee shows, right? Mm-hmm. Usually like 1 or 2 p.m. And they have an evening show. But, but what people in the Philly area do, they'll often drive to Trenton, park cheaply, take the local train in. So you're not paying for like the Amtrak, high cost price, which, you could get pretty affordably anyway, Amtrak, in my opinion, but it's, maybe $15 and you take it in. So it's not necessarily faster when you do it that way, but you don't have to deal with parking and everything when you get there. Yeah. So you do that in the morning, you spend the day in Manhattan, you see a show, you have dinner, and you're back home in your bed, right? Which is pretty amazing, right? Yeah. I mean, I think people in the Philly area take that for granted that they have access to that many things that close to them. Yeah. But I know I love all the things. I mean, the other part of Manhattan, though, is that you're close to the cruise port in New York City, right? So did a Disney cruise out of New York in 2018, and super easy cruise port.
Did you go to the Bahamas? Or not Bahamas, the Bermuda?
No, that one. I sailed twice out of New York, and then once out of New York, I guess, and once out of Bayonne, which is very like across the river from New York City. Yeah. So, and that was this past summer on Oasis of the Seas Royal Caribbean. And for that one, you see the
Statue of Liberty.
You see it in the background. You don't pass it. You go under the Verrazano Bridge to go back, go out into the ocean. Yeah. And then the Disney one, though, because it's literally in Manhattan, the port, you do pass the Statue of Liberty while you're sailing, which was really pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, to float by that. It looks so small when you're on a huge cruise ship.
So small even when you're like, I went to Battery Park because I wanted to ride the carousel, which is really cool. And we could see the Statue of Liberty. And I was like, that's it? Really?
I know. It's a little underwhelming. I think for me, it was more in 8th grade, we did a field trip up for the day, and we did the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, and it was like more of a historical trip, which was cool. But in 8th grade, I was like, I didn't appreciate it as much. I was like, the hell,
because
what's
you're a
going
little
on here?
shithead 13-year-old. Of course you didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, this is cool. I don't have to learn, but I don't know what I'm doing here. So, but no, the cruise, like doing that was awesome. And then even when the Virgin ship, Scarlet Lady, was docked before they set sail during COVID, and they were having people in the travel industry come up and tour it, right? It was just docked, and
I remember
I spent the day on it, and that was awesome. Yeah, drove up, or stayed overnight, walked from my hotel in the fashion district of Manhattan, and then toured the ship for a few hours, left, hopped in my car, and was home by dinner time.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think you should move closer to the East Coast, Kayla.
I mean, we'll see.
That's the theme.
Yeah.
That is the theme here.
I will say it seems like you've got it made in Philly, being like, I'm currently a 4-hour flight from New York City. When I lived in Washington, I think it was 5 or 6 hours, where like for you could go there and turn around and come back in the same amount of time,
right,
and not have to deal with being on a plane, which sounds
good.
Good.
And I think you're less than 4 hours driving or train from DC to New York City, from DC, Philly, Baltimore, Boston, right? I mean,
it's all so close.
Rhode Island, Connecticut, all those places you can be to New York City in really less than 4 hours. In many cases, far less than that. But it's about a 5-hour drive from my house to Boston. So, but I mean, it's very tight.
Yeah,
just like.
You were trying so hard to have something funny to say there, and you didn't have it. Damn.
I did. I did have it. I was just trying to not be grossly offensive.
I will say,
which is progress for me.
I'm proud of you. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
5 hours, and I'm still in Texas most directions that I go. 4 hours, I'm still in Texas every direction I go. So I would much rather not still be in Texas.
Exactly. And for me, like in the Philly area, in 15 minutes, I can be in Delaware or New Jersey, right? So it is just a very small, and in 2 hours be in New York City. Yeah. So and then the other things we didn't talk about, we talked about Broadway and but obviously the people and the cultures and the food, right? I mean, in Manhattan, you're getting a lot of like kitschy kind of chain type places, right? But as you venture out and go into those smaller subsections that you mentioned, like Astoria or what was it, Carol City,
Carroll Gardens,
that you mentioned, Carroll Gardens, right? You're going to get those more unique, better, smaller, locally owned restaurants.
Yeah. It's so interesting. My 2 trips were so drastically different. So my first trip was with Rebecca and a friend of hers. And the friend of hers was a very picky eater and just like generally a difficult person to travel with. And it made the trip really difficult for me because I'm the kind of person, like, I want to go do stuff. I want to go see what the locals are seeing. I want to go eat what the locals are eating. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I want to do. I don't want to go to the tourist destinations. Like, that doesn't appeal to me. And that trip was sort of catering to 2 different people who'd never been to New York City and had very different ideas of what going to New York City looked like. So I left that trip, and I think I told Rebecca even that I was like, I don't want to go back. Like, this wasn't a good time. This doesn't appeal to me. Like, I don't get it. And then the opportunity came up for my mom and I to go. My mom had never been to New York City until we went for this Jonas Brothers concert. And I don't know if you feel this way about your family, but like, my mom is the easiest person for me to travel with because I've been doing it my whole life. And she and I are very like, go with the flow. What do you want to do? Okay, yeah, let's go do that. Oh, well, what do you want to do? Okay, yeah, let's go do that. So like, we booked a food tour in Brooklyn that was so cool and took us to like so many great spots. We ate a bunch of really good food. We like found the local coffee shops. You know, like there was just so much more exploring that we did. And again, like being on the whim of like, other than going to this concert, we didn't really have any plans. And it was also just the difference between being in Brooklyn and being in Manhattan for me. And it was such a different experience. And I think that if you've never been to New York City, you really have to think about what you want to experience. And if you're wanting that tourist experience, which some people do, and that I respect that, you know, staying in Manhattan is probably the best thing for you. But if you're wanting to experience what not the 1% experience living in New York City, then you're probably going to want to be in a different borough. And depending on who you are and what things are important to you, obviously that's going to change drastically between where you're going to go. But I think it's really important. And it's a thing that I didn't realize until my second trip when I was like, oh my gosh, wait, no, this is totally different than the first time that I came here. And it also just goes to show that like your travel partner is so important. And like, you have to know the people that like, it was fine and we made the best of it. But like, you have to know the people that you're traveling with and like, if you're going to vibe with them traveling or not. And I knew prior to that trip that I wasn't going to vibe with her because we were in like a group chat and just like the conversations that we were having, like we were talking about doing Broadway roulette. And I think it's like $130 to get guaranteed orchestra seats on Broadway roulette. And her response was that that was expensive. And so it was like sort of a reality check for her of like how much it costs to go to a Broadway show. Where like my mom and I were like, yeah, let's just keep doing this. This is great. And it's like, I think it's like $50 or $70 for the regular tickets. And like, yeah, it just goes to show that it's important to know where you're going and know who you're going with.
Yeah. And setting boundaries of sorts too before rather than during, right? Yes. I mean, expectations are important, right? And agreed. You know, I know you and I both help people travel a lot, and so it's I often say that in mixed group travel, right? Because there's so much time lost in being like, well, what's next? Or I want to go to Brooklyn, and the other person says I want to go to Manhattan, and then the answer to that should be, okay, you go to Manhattan, I'm going to Brooklyn. And then there's no hard feelings. Yeah. Right? So, oh boy. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you went back and had a better experience.
Yeah. That's honestly, so I'm currently, Chris already knows this, but I'm currently in the process of trying to figure out where to move. We're getting ready to sell our house in San Antonio and just sort of exploring options. Chris really wants us to go to Philly. We'll probably end up in Philly, honestly. But New York City is honestly like the place that Brian and I could both see ourselves living in very easily. The problem is the amount of money that we would pay. We could only get a 1-bedroom, and with 2 humans and 2 cats, I just don't think that's safe for any of us. So
no,
probably not gonna happen.
Yeah. No, and you being one of those humans would be really rough.
Yeah. I need my space. Brian needs his space.
Which is why Philly offers a lot of that. Not everything that New York City offers, but a lot. And for a more affordable approach. Yeah. So I think if you are looking to go to New York City, if the adventurers are thinking about it, I think you just go, right? Mm-hmm. And come up with a plan. I agree with what you were saying about the touristy parts, although sometimes that makes people feel safer because they know it's going to be busy and there's tours and things that they can do the hop on, hop off bus or whatever it might be. But agreed. I mean, if you can extend it a little bit and do all the things, right? I mean, I've taken carriage rides while it's snowing in Central Park and eaten it, right? And all the different aspects of what it has to offer all 4 seasons, really, right? And if you are flying, which is unfortunate because you're just not living in the better part of the country. I'm kidding. Am I? It's, you have options too. Like you mentioned, you flew into JFK, right? And so you have JFK, you have LaGuardia, LGA, or you have Newark, which is in New Jersey, right? EWR is the code for that, but it's a very quick, train ride up from the airport there into New York City. So you have lots of options to get there. you know, and don't discount adding, like doing a cruise out of New Jersey or New York, like I
Yeah.
mentioned too, right? I mean, those cruises either go north upwards to like Canada, Bermuda, or they'll do the two cruises I did the same thing. They went to the private island of that cruise line, Disney and Royal Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
and then they docked at Port Canaveral, which is not a great port, right, for a
Yeah.
short day. You know, you can't really go to the theme parks or anything,
No.
but for me, when I cruise, the cruise is the destination anyway, so I'm okay as long as it's floating. And it is so nice to not have to fly to get on a cruise,
Oh, yeah.
right, in the Northeast, right? So lots of options. And when do you think your next trip will be? When you move to Philly?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, so we're coming to see you in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be there for 3 days. And I'm sort of like, do we spend one of those days just going into New York City? But that seems like a waste of time because we're actively like trying to figure out if we're going to move to Philly or not. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the big, like, obviously you're a big selling point for Philly, right? We could record this in person and not do
We could.
this.
We could.
And just generally like our friendship, I guess. Something like that.
Yes.
But yeah, being that close. My mom and my grandma are actually talking about taking a trip in a couple of months. And I think it's sort of rude that they didn't invite me. So I might invite myself. We'll see.
Are they going to New York?
Yeah. My grandma's also never been to New York. And so I think my mom wants to do what I did for her. My grandma's 81. So like she's gotta go do it while she can, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you should join them. Make sure they're okay.
Also, so that's the other thing about New York City that I think we should touch on real quick, which is that it is very difficult to so like thinking about 3 adults, right? Finding a room that can easily house 3 adults or even like a family of 4. Like it's not very easy. A lot of hotel rooms in Manhattan specifically are like 1 king bed and that's it.
Yeah, and you can put your arms out and touch both walls, right? When you were saying that about the pod, I'm like, even a regular hotel room is not going to be large, right? Because the buildings are so old. And same thing with those theaters, right? I mean, you cannot be a very large plus size person, or you're going to really be uncomfortable, to be honest with you, right? I mean, because those seats are very tight, and if you have any kind of anxiety issues of like, it's probably that those activities are not for you.
Yeah.
But you know, I agree with that. The only other thing too, I mean, the taxi drivers are crazy. I mean, I thought you take your life in your hands, and I actually asked a friend one time when we were there, and I said, well, don't these like, because all the DoorDash, Uber Eats people drive their bike, and they have like the little, and I'm like, how do these people not die? And she was like, oh no, they do.
They do. There was a New York Times article about it like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I was like, yeah. I mean, they are.
It's scary.
Yeah. It is very scary. Yeah. People are.
The drivers
crazy.
are wild in New York City. Okay. So the other thing that I didn't know until coming to New York City is that nobody abides by the crosswalk signs. So I actually have a friend who was like born and raised in Manhattan. She was my roommate on my first Disney World College program, and she actually had I think it was a taxi driver run over her foot. Like this is probably a decade ago. She was fine. It was cold out, but they ran like what? That's just like a normal occurrence?
Not surprised. Not surprised. Not surprised. Not surprised.
It's a great time though. Even if you could potentially die on a bike or get run over.
I think you do need to go once and experience it, right? I mean, one time I was there for work and I was talking to a family on in the elevator, and they were from somewhere in Europe, right? And right, because we go over to Paris and to London, and you think like, oh my, for me especially, like really putting it in perspective that people are flying all this way to go to New York City. Right? For me, it's just a 2-hour drive, right? But somewhere I can go for the day. But so it's not as glamorous to travel to, but you got to get there. If you haven't been, you got to get there once, for sure.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that.
Well, tell us where your favorite place to go and what to do in New York City. We'd love to hear from you. And why don't you wrap it up, Biatch?
Yeah, thank you everyone so much. We appreciate you tolerating us this far. I don't even know how many episodes in we are, but thank you so much for listening to us. As always, we really appreciate all of your support. Please make sure you're subscribing and downloading. Those numbers help us be seen to more people, which is just more people to tolerate us, hopefully. Or they're going to hate it. And at least they know, you know?
It's fair. That's fair.
But thank you all so much. And let's just go.